The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window as I sat with my favorite porcelain teacup, watching the steam rise from my Earl Grey. At 72, these quiet moments had become sacred to me, the house still, the world not yet demanding my attention. I'd lived in this villa for 43 years, raised my daughter Sarah here, buried my husband from this very living room. Every corner held a memory, every creak of the floorboards told a story. The mortgage had been paid off for over a decade, and I'd always imagined I'd spend my final years here, surrounded by the ghosts of better times. But as I sipped my tea that Tuesday morning in Pueblo, I had no idea that my entire world was about to crumble with the turn of a key. The front door slammed open with such force that my teacup rattled against its saucer. My heart jumped into my throat as heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, footsteps I recognized but had never heard sound so confident, so entitled. Jesse appeared in my kitchen doorway, his usual slouched posture replaced by something that made my skin crawl. He wasn't the nervous, unemployed man who usually shuffled through my home, apologizing for his presence. This Jesse stood tall, his chest puffed out, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Carol," he said, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, one that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and every instinct I'd honed over 7 decades was screaming at me to run. "Jesse, what are you doing here so early?" I managed to ask, setting down my teacup with trembling fingers. He'd been married to my Sarah for 3 years now, and in all that time, he'd never once entered my home without knocking, without that apologetic smile that said he knew he was imposing. But today, he walked around my kitchen like he owned it, opening cabinets, peering into my refrigerator with the casual entitlement of someone surveying their own property. My stomach twisted into knots as I watched him, this man who'd been living off my daughter's teacher salary while claiming to find himself professionally. The way he moved through my space felt like a violation, like watching a stranger rifle through my most personal belongings. I gripped the edge of my kitchen table, my knuckles white with tension, waiting for him to explain this bizarre behavior. "Actually, Carol, we need to talk," Jesse said, pulling out one of my dining chairs and sitting down without invitation. The casual way he made himself comfortable in my space sent chills down my spine. He leaned back in the chair, my late husband's favorite chair, and studied me with eyes that held no warmth, no respect, no acknowledgement of the woman who had welcomed him into this family. "Sarah and I have been talking, and we've decided it's time for some changes around here." His words hung in the air like a threat, each syllable carefully chosen to maximum impact. I felt my world beginning to tilt, the familiar walls of my kitchen suddenly feeling foreign and unsafe. This wasn't the awkward, bumbling Jesse I knew. This was someone else entirely. Someone who spoke with the confidence of a man holding all the cards. The silence stretched between us as I tried to process what he was saying. Changes? What kind of changes could he possibly be talking about? This was my home, my sanctuary, the place where I'd planned to live out my remaining years in peace. I thought about Sarah, my only child, the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for after her father died. She'd always been my anchor, my reason for getting up each morning, the one person I trusted completely in this world. Surely she wouldn't be part of whatever scheme Jesse was cooking up. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The look of a man who knew he held power over me, who was savoring the moment before delivering a blow he knew would destroy me. My hands began to shake as the terrible possibility began to form in my mind. "You see, Carol," Jesse continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made me want to slap him. "This house is way too big for one person. You're getting older, and frankly, it's not safe for you to be rattling around in here all alone." He gestured around my kitchen as if it were some decrepit hovel instead of the lovingly maintained home I'd poured my heart into for decades. "Sarah and I need more space. We're thinking about starting a family, and this place would be perfect for raising kids." The audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow. He was talking about my home, my life, my future, as if I were already dead and buried. The casual way he dismissed my existence, my right to live in the home I'd worked my entire life to maintain, filled me with a rage I hadn't felt since my husband's funeral, when his relatives tried to claim pieces of our life together. "What exactly are you suggesting, Jesse?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though inside I was screaming. I already knew the answer, could see it in his smug expression, but I needed to hear him say it. I needed to understand just how far this betrayal went, how completely my own family was willing to erase me from my own life. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the rational voice that told me this couldn't be happening, that my daughter would never allow such a thing. But Jesse's confidence, his complete lack of concern for my feelings, told a different story. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned, calculated, and somehow, impossibly, my Sarah was part of it. The realization hit me like a freight train, stealing my breath and leaving me gasping for air in my own kitchen. "I'm not suggesting anything, Carol," Jesse said, his smile widening into something cruel and triumphant. "I'm telling you, we're moving in, and you're moving out. There are some lovely senior communities in town, much more appropriate for someone your age." He spoke as if he were doing me a favor, as if uprooting me from the only home I'd known for 4 decades was an act of kindness rather than cruelty. The way he said "someone your age" made me feel ancient, disposable, like a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. I stared at this man who had eaten at my table, who I'd welcomed into my family despite my reservations, who had never contributed a single dollar to any household he'd lived in. And now he was sitting in my kitchen, in my husband's chair, telling me that my life as I knew it was over. The sheer impossibility of it all made me wonder if I was having some kind of nightmare, if I'd wake up any moment to find my tea still warm and my world still intact. "You can't be serious," I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew he was deadly serious. The look in Jesse's eyes wasn't the look of someone making a cruel joke. It was the look of someone who had already won a game I didn't even know we were playing. My legs felt weak beneath me, and I gripped the kitchen counter for support, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. How could he possibly think he had the right to kick me out of my own home? This villa had been in my name for over 40 years, every mortgage payment made with money I'd earned through decades of hard work. I'd raised Sarah here as a single mother after my husband died, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, sacrificing my own dreams to give her every opportunity. The deed was in my name. The utilities were in my name. Every legal document tied to this property bore my signature. Jesse had no claim here, no right to make such demands. But something in his demeanor told me there was more to this story, something I wasn't seeing. The confidence radiating from him wasn't the bravado of a desperate man making empty threats. It was the assurance of someone who held cards I couldn't see. My stomach churned as I tried to piece together how this could be possible, what leverage he could possibly have over me. "Jesse, this is my house," I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by indignation and disbelief. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you need to leave, right now." I pointed toward the door, my hand trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. But instead of backing down, instead of showing even a hint of shame or uncertainty, Jesse actually laughed, a sound so cold and dismissive that it made my blood freeze in my veins. "Oh, Carol," he said, shaking his head like I was a confused child who didn't understand the simplest concepts. "I think you need to check your facts." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, placing it on my kitchen table with the flourish of someone revealing a winning poker hand. The paper looked official, legal, with the kind of formal formatting that made my heart sink before I even read a single word. "You might want to take a look at this," he said, sliding it across the table toward me. My hands shook as I reached for the document, every instinct telling me that whatever was written on that paper would change everything. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too hot, the walls closing in around me as I unfolded what appeared to be some kind of legal document. The letterhead was from a law office I didn't recognize, and the formal language made my eyes blur with panic. As I read the first few lines, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Property transfer, deed change. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison to Jesse Thomas Morrison. The words swam before my eyes, each one a dagger to my heart, but I forced myself to keep reading, to understand the magnitude of what I was seeing. According to this document, my daughter, my own flesh and blood, had transferred ownership of my villa to her husband 6 months ago. 6 months. While I'd been living here, paying the utilities, maintaining the property, believing it was still mine, the legal ownership had already changed hands. The date on the transfer was from last spring, around the time Sarah had asked me to sign some insurance papers that she said would protect the family assets. I remembered that day clearly now, how rushed she'd seemed, how she'd barely let me read the documents before asking for my signature. "This can't be legal," I gasped, my voice barely audible over the roaring in my ears. I never agreed to this. I never signed away my house. But even as I said the words, fragments of memory began piecing themselves together like a horrifying puzzle. Sarah's insistence that I sign those papers quickly, her explanation that they were just updating beneficiary information, the way she'd shuffled the documents so I couldn't read them thoroughly. I'd trusted her completely. She was my daughter, my only child, the person I'd given everything to. The possibility that she would deceive me, that she would steal from me, had never even entered my mind. But the evidence was right there in black and white, bearing what looked suspiciously like my own signature at the bottom of a document I'd never knowingly signed. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. Jesse watched my face as the realization dawned, and I could see him savoring every moment of my anguish. "Sarah was very clever about it," he said, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "She knew you'd never agree to sign over the house willingly, so she buried the transfer documents in with a bunch of other paperwork. You signed it yourself, Carol. Your signature is right there at the bottom." He pointed to the signature line with one finger, and I stared at the familiar loops and curves of my own handwriting, the evidence of my own unwitting participation in my destruction. The room began to spin as I realized the full scope of their deception. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a recent development. This had been planned for months, maybe longer. While I'd been treating Sarah and Jesse like beloved family members, they'd been plotting to steal my home, my security, my entire future. "Where is Sarah?" I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. "I want to talk to my daughter right now." I needed to hear this from her own lips, needed to understand how the little girl I'd raised, the woman I'd sacrificed everything for, could do something so cruel and calculating. Surely there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that could make sense of this nightmare. Maybe Jesse had manipulated her, forced her into this somehow. Maybe she didn't understand what she was signing, just like I hadn't understood. But the look on Jesse's face told me I was grasping at straws, hoping for a mercy that didn't exist. "Sarah's at work," he said casually, as if we were discussing the weather instead of the destruction of my entire life. "But she knows all about this, Carol. In fact, it was her idea." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and leaving me gasping for air. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. The same clock that had marked time in this house for 20 years, that had counted down the minutes of my marriage, my motherhood, my entire adult life. Now it was counting down to the end of everything I'd ever known. I looked around at the familiar surroundings, the coffee stains on the counter from countless morning routines, the height marks on the door frame where I'd measured Sarah's growth, the family photos covering the refrigerator. Every inch of this space held memories that Jesse was now claiming as his own, moments of joy and sorrow that he was erasing with a single piece of paper. The magnitude of the betrayal was overwhelming, not just from Jesse, but from Sarah, my own daughter, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world. As I sat there in my own kitchen, holding the document that had stolen my future, I realized that I wasn't just losing my home. I was losing my family, my identity, everything that had defined me for the past 4 decades. The hours that followed Jesse's revelation passed in a blur of disbelief and desperate phone calls. I tried reaching Sarah at the elementary school where she taught, but the secretary told me she was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. Meetings. While I was having my entire world ripped apart, my daughter was sitting in meetings, probably discussing lesson plans and parent conferences as if nothing had happened. I left message after message on her voicemail, my voice growing more frantic with each attempt. "Sarah, please call me back. There's been some terrible mistake. Jesse showed me papers that can't possibly be real. Please, honey, I need to talk to you." But as the afternoon wore on and my phone remained silent, a cold dread began settling in my chest. Maybe there was no mistake. Maybe my daughter really had betrayed me in the most unthinkable way possible. Jesse had made himself completely at home, wandering through my house like he was taking inventory of his new possessions. I watched in horror as he opened closets, peered into my bedroom, Even went down to the basement where I kept my husband's tools and our old photo albums. The casual way he violated my privacy, the complete lack of respect he showed for my personal space, made me feel like I was being robbed in broad daylight. "You know, Carol," he called from the living room, "this furniture is pretty outdated. We'll probably donate most of it to charity." His words felt like physical blows, each one designed to remind me that nothing in this house, not even the couch where my husband used to read me the Sunday paper, was mine anymore. I followed him from room to room, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life, powerless to stop the destruction of everything I held dear. When Sarah finally walked through the front door at 6 o'clock, I was waiting in the hallway like a woman possessed. The sight of her, my beautiful daughter with her father's eyes and my stubborn chin, should have brought me comfort, but instead, it filled me with a desperate hope that was already beginning to curdle into something darker. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, seeing my tear-stained face and trembling hands. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that she was genuinely confused, that Jessie had acted without her knowledge, that my daughter was as much a victim in this as I was. But then, I saw the way her eyes darted to Jessie, who was lounging in my living room like he owned the place, and the quick look that passed between them told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't confusion on Sarah's face. It was guilt, and the careful performance of someone who had been caught in a lie. "Sarah, please tell me this isn't true," I begged, holding up the transfer documents with shaking hands. "Please tell me you didn't sign away my house without telling me." I searched her face for any sign of the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who'd cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. But the woman standing before me was a stranger, someone who could look me in the eye while destroying my life. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice taking on the patient tone she probably used with difficult parents at school. She guided me to the kitchen table, my kitchen table, in my house that was apparently no longer mine, and sat down across from me like we were having a normal mother-daughter conversation instead of discussing the end of my world as I knew it. "I know this is hard to understand," Sarah began, her words carefully chosen and rehearsed, "but Jessie and I have been talking about our future, and we really need more space." She spoke as if she were explaining a simple business transaction, not the theft of her mother's home and security. "You're getting older, Mom, and this house is too much for you to handle alone. We found a lovely senior community just outside of town. It has activities, medical care on site, people your own age to socialize with." The way she described my future made it sound like she was offering me a vacation instead of exile, but I could hear the steel beneath her gentle tone. This wasn't a discussion or a request. This was a notification of a decision that had already been made. The daughter I'd raised to be independent and strong had turned those qualities against me, using them to justify the most heartless betrayal I could imagine. "But Sarah, this is my home," I whispered, my voice breaking on every word. "I raised you here. Your father and I built our entire life in this house. How can you just take it away from me?" I reached across the table to touch her hand, desperate for any sign of the connection we'd once shared, but she pulled away from me like my touch burned her skin. The rejection was almost as painful as the theft itself. "Mom, you're being dramatic," she said, her voice growing impatient. "It's not like we're throwing you out on the street. We've already looked at several facilities, and there's one that has an opening next month. You'll love it there. No more worrying about maintenance, no more being alone all the time." She made it sound like a gift, like she was rescuing me from some terrible fate instead of condemning me to one. I stared at my daughter, this woman who shared my DNA but seemed to have inherited none of my values, and felt something die inside my chest. The Sarah I'd known, the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for, would never have been capable of such calculated cruelty. But this Sarah, the one sitting across from me, explaining why stealing my home was actually for my own good, was someone I didn't recognize. "When did you become so cold?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "When did you stop caring about anyone but yourself?" For just a moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or regret, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "I'm not cold, Mom," she said, her voice defensive now. "I'm being practical. Jessie and I are young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. You've already lived your life in this house. Now it's our turn." The finality in her voice, the complete dismissal of my feelings and my rights, hit me like a slap across the face. I realized then that this wasn't just about the house. It was about my place in their lives, my value as a human being. In their eyes, I had become obsolete, a burden to be managed rather than a mother to be cherished. The years I'd spent working multiple jobs to pay for Sarah's education, the sacrifices I'd made to give her every opportunity, the love I'd poured into raising her, none of it mattered now. I was just an old woman taking up space in a house that younger, more deserving people wanted. As I sat there in my own kitchen, looking at my daughter's face and seeing a stranger, I understood that I hadn't just lost my home. I'd lost my family, my identity, and any illusion I'd had about the kind of person I'd raised. The betrayal was complete, and there was no going back from this moment. That night, I lay awake in my bed, the same bed I'd shared with my husband for 25 years, the same bed where I'd comforted Sarah through childhood nightmares, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Every creak of the house, every familiar sound that had once brought me comfort now felt like a countdown to my eviction. Jessie and Sarah had left after our confrontation, but not before Jessie made it clear that I had 30 days to make arrangements. 30 days to dismantle a lifetime, to pack up 43 years of memories, and pretend that losing everything I'd ever worked for was somehow a blessing in disguise. The casual cruelty of it all was breathtaking. The way they'd planned this betrayal for months while sitting at my dinner table, accepting my hospitality, letting me believe I still had a family who loved me. The next morning brought a parade of humiliations I never could have imagined, as Sarah arrived with a stack of brochures for senior living facilities, spreading them across my kitchen table like a real estate agent showing properties to an eager buyer. "I've already scheduled tours for this afternoon," she announced, her voice bright and efficient, as if she were planning a fun outing instead of my exile. The brochures were full of smiling elderly people engaged in crafts and group activities, their faces radiating the kind of forced happiness that made my stomach turn. "Look at this one, Mom," Sarah said, pointing to a photo of residents playing bingo. "They have movie nights and book clubs. You'll make so many new friends." The way she spoke to me, like I was a child who needed to be convinced that vegetables tasted good, made me want to scream, because this wasn't about my social life or my happiness. This was about clearing me out so they could move in. 3 weeks into my nightmare, as I sat surrounded by boxes in what used to be my living room, something inside me finally snapped. I'd spent decades being the accommodating mother, the grateful widow, the polite woman who never made waves or demanded what was rightfully hers. But watching Jessie measure my walls for his renovations while Sarah discussed paint colors for their bedroom was the final straw that broke whatever was left of my spirit. I stood up from my chair, my husband's old recliner that they'd already decided to donate, and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept important papers. Hidden beneath old utility bills and warranty cards was a document I'd forgotten about until this moment. My husband's life insurance policy that had never been claimed, worth enough to hire the best lawyer in Colorado. For the first time in weeks, I smiled a real smile because my daughter had made one crucial mistake in her perfect plan. The next morning, I called the law firm of Morrison & Associates, no relation to my traitorous daughter, and within hours, I was sitting across from Patricia Morrison, a sharp-eyed attorney who specialized in elder fraud and family theft. "Mrs. Henderson," she said after reviewing my case, "what your daughter did constitutes elder abuse and fraud, regardless of whether you signed those papers." She explained that the deceptive way Sarah had obtained my signature, burying the property transfer in other documents, was illegal under Colorado law. "We're going to file an emergency injunction to stop any sale or transfer of the property, and then we're going to make your daughter's life very complicated." As Patricia outlined our legal strategy, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. My daughter thought she was so clever, but she'd underestimated the woman who'd raised her, the woman who'd survived everything life had thrown at her. The war for my home was just beginning, and this time I was fighting back.